You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka. In this episode, we hear from a Malaysian fact checking firm. They've moved away from the usual format of fact checking articles. You probably know what I mean, the pieces that identify a false claim and then debunk it in the succeeding paragraphs. Instead, they're looking to innovate how we combat the growing and ever evolving threat of false information online. Is the misinformation a lot more intense around Gaza ever since, late last year?
The type of misinfo we get isn't necessarily always around the Palestinian side because there's so little info coming out from that side when it comes to specific things, and you have to look at international news media and how information is controlled. So there's also a lot of mis and disinfo coming out from sort of the Israeli end as well, right? So they are the ones who control the information, and it's about how you fact check those notions that they put forward. So fact check, we are a Malaysian fact-checking media literacy initiative, but we straddle more than just media literacy for the public.
That's Khalil Majid. He's a journalist and Fact Check Lab's project director.
But we don't only do fact-checking for the public, we also conduct media literacy and fact-checking, verification, crisis communications, investigations as well when necessary for commercial clients and anyone who's willing to work with us on countering disinformation at scale, be it in the public space or in the private space. So we're currently expanding, and part of the work that we are doing now is trying to stick to our core value of trying to provide a public good, as well as provide insights into potential disinformation threats.
Is part of what you're talking about the regular disinformation reports that you've been releasing lately?
Yeah, so part of that is what we're doing with Fact Check Insights. It's a new blog post that we started releasing. The idea is we've been in the disinformation space for a while, and we kind of have a knack for finding topics and sort of correlating trends and events to foresee essentially where these kind of disinformation threats are going. And so we thought it'd be a very useful resource not only for the public but also for commercial clients to have this kind of information out there.
I know you just mentioned you're based in Malaysia and many of your clients are in Malaysia, but in terms of scope of the disinformation that you study and that you cover, does it tend to be regional, global?
The focus is on Malaysia, but most of the people, I think the people we work with aren't necessarily always just within Malaysia, but we work regionally as well with clients within Southeast Asia primarily. But the kind of disinformation we track and highlight is global because we see that these trends tend to move from abroad towards us. It is not always something that's locally manufactured in that sense. We try to have an open mindset to how we interface with these things so that we can provide the right insights at the right time. And usually, I think people have been reading a lot more of these stories from what we've been watching, and I think that's a nice feeling to have that people are finding it useful.
While these bi-monthly reports are primarily geared towards companies, they're also regularly posted to FactCheck's website, and they cover misinformation and disinformation trends that affect nearly everyone. One thing that stood out to me is in your two reports, there were sections devoted to Gaza. I would really like to get you to talk about that, but maybe before that, having done this twice now, what are your main takeaways in terms of these reports? What stood out to you?
The big thing right now, is something we've always kept to internally for Fact Check, which is we've realized that majority of disinformation exists spreads because of events. So if for anyone looking to try to tackle disinformation or wanting to try to predict it, all they have to really look at is the events that are happening and surrounding it, and how how you sort of slot into those kind of disinformation events that are happening. Israel-Gaza war. It's sort of, for Malaysia in particular, it's a very touchy topic because Malaysia has been a very prominent supporter of the independence of the Palestinians for years, and that's become bred into sort of our culture in that sense.
Over 60% of Malaysians practice Islam, the country's official religion.
It's kind of a narrative that runs through all of Malaysia. I think no one really tries to say that, we are pro-Israeli in Malaysia. That's never going to happen. And that lends to a lot of things as well, like, because the Malaysian way of thinking about it now, and this is particularly because of the boycott movement, which is very strong in Malaysia. Any links to any Israeli company or any company seen as being supportive of the Israeli regime is automatically seen as, the persona non grata. Like, you are going to get boycotted regardless. There's going to be a campaign against you. We saw that very recently as well, and we were on our end. We were looking at it and going like, yeah, this is probably going to happen with how this Malaysian company Zeus.
Zeus Coffee is a Malaysian chain of cafes. The company expanded to the Philippines in 2023, its first venture out of Malaysia. There are now 16 branches across Luzon.
So Zeus had this tie-in with Adidas that wasn't really much of a tie-in, to be honest.
Zeus Coffee participated in a sports and fashion event hosted by Adidas, one of the brands facing boycotts in Malaysia.
And the backlash they got, because Adidas is seen as part of the problem, for the Israeli-Palestinian war. So they were just hammered online for it. And even though they responded, it didn't really work very well for them.
Their initial apology, according to FactCheck's report, fell flat to consumers because it failed to take a clear stance against Israel's actions in Gaza. Instead, it was a generic condemnation of war and violence. They were forced to issue a second apology. The pro-Palestine boycott movement in Malaysia is a powerful one, impacting even the largest of chains. KFC, for example, was reportedly forced to shut down over 100 of its branches in the country after facing backlash over perceived ties to Israel. McDonald's is also suing Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, or BDS Malaysia, claiming that false statements made by the group cost them over $1 million in sales.
There's a lot of useful information in here as well on how you interact with these types of crises as a company. You want to be firm in the way that you counter these reports, but also you need to be, I think, very clear and based in facts, and try to sort of get around the mindset, the mob mentality that happens with these things, to overcome the issue at the end of the day.
More on the information ecosystem around the pro-Palestine boycott movement after a quick break. Yeah, that's so interesting because you mentioned Malaysia's long history of supporting Palestine, and I think in the Philippines it's a very different situation. I don't think the awareness of the Palestinian cause was very high here before the conflict escalated again last year. And I think the effect of that has been trying to abide by the boycotts has been even harder for people here because there are so many moving parts. Do you think in Malaysia it's a bit easier to navigate around that information ecosystem because there is a long history of supporting the Palestinian cause?
I feel so. I feel like at the end of the day, like, when Malaysians are very empathetic to the struggle of the Palestinians. So for them, it's something to stand for. There's a lot of layers to it as well. The way I like to think about how you can think about these things, like, where these boycotts are going, or who's going to be targeted, or how disinformation works in this sense, is you think of like a Venn diagram of all the things that work out, and all the things that intersect with that Venn diagram are usually spaces where reactions are going to come from.
Essentially, FactCheck has developed a resource companies can use to avoid, or if necessary, manage crises.
like with the Palestinians, right? So we've got a long history with them. They're Muslims as well. They also, the ideology is similar. And there's also a lot to do with freedom. It's a lot to do with religion, race, and all these other things that happen. I think the main point about it is also like what you mentioned, right? Like in the Philippines, it wasn't something that was well known, or people weren't very well informed about it. But the growing impact of what we're seeing in the news and how people are reacting to it, and how people are reporting it as well, it's becoming more global. And that means that at some point in the future, from what from what we do as well, you can potentially see this kind of mindset of trying to do the right thing to safeguard the people that are most vulnerable. It may spill over into Filipino society as well, and companies that are heavily linked could become targets for boycotts, or some sort of movement, or criticism online, or some sort of disinformation. So it would be important for them to think about how these relationships work, and how to best prepare for something like that when it comes.
I think it's so great also that you chose to focus on boycotts in particular, because I think, it's so hard to see what's happening in Gaza right now, and boycotts are one of the very few ways that people feel they can have agency in this situation. But on the other end, we just talked about how that information ecosystem is a bit hard to navigate. Do you think, is there a way for people, if they want to be involved in this movement, to make sure that they're being involved in the right way, like boycotting the right companies, boycotting in ways that are actually effective?
I think that's beyond the scope of what we do when it comes to it, because our goal with the way we work on these reports is it's meant to be a highlight of the potential disinfo threats that exist out there, for not or where these kinds of disinformation issues pop up. What are these spaces that you need to look into to be well aware of it? This applies both to the public and to sort of the private sector as well. Because for the public, it's clear, like when you don't want your aunties and your uncles to be sharing with you things about, falsehoods about Gaza as well is one thing, right? People get scammed out of these spaces because it's such a hot issue in Malaysia, for example. My mom will send me a message saying, "Oh, watch out! Please donate to the Gazans through this link or whatever." And it turns out to be a scam website or whatever. So it's a space to be well aware of when things like this come up, and to help people be more skeptical about the information that they receive and try to defend against it. So it's important to the whole idea of what we're doing is just to provide those insights and sort of a broad overview of what's happening, so that you can react, sort of proactively, work your way around the issue rather than try to react all the time to it.
Something I found interesting is, I think usually when someone hears the term fact check, or when they see an article about it online, it's usually addressing maybe one lie or a series of lies about a certain topic, and then it goes on to debunk, right? But what you present on your website, at least based on what I've seen, it almost feels like, rather than, taking on one piece of disinformation, you're tracking conversation and discourse around certain topics. Could you talk a bit more about why that's the approach that you chose to take, and what the thinking was behind that?
That's an actually interesting question, because if you go through our website, through the stuff we've done in the past, we do what you would normally think of as fact checking, right? But I think we realized earlier this year that there is a preconceived notion of what a fact check looks like. It's a story, it's true, false, and that's it. You've done your part, kind of, in that sense. And everyone's always treated fact checking as a very honorable endeavor to counter disinformation. Fact checking is useful to a certain degree, but there is still holes in the way that it works. Because I've always said in every meeting I've gone to, and I've been asked questions around this as all the time. It's a When it comes to countering disinformation, it's not something we can win.
This is something the news has had to reckon with as an industry. The run-of-the-mill fact-checking story is such a narrow and quaint response to the dizzying and often malicious information ecosystem online.
Because disinformation is, we are always playing catch up to the disinfo, right? Disinfo comes out, we counter it, and then we job's done for the day. The problem with that kind of thinking around it is we're always, in the arms race of eyeballs, basically. The disinformation will always get more eyeballs. It's not bound by the ethics of how you do a fact check, the way you write it, the way you present it. The disinfo can be whatever it wants to be. So we thought we've gotten quite decent at looking at these trends and forecasting things and trying to prepare ourselves for certain types of disinformation. Why not let's try to use it as a tool to inform the public about threats that are going to be out there so that they can prepare themselves accordingly. So it's part of a longer term strategy for us in that sense, to make sure that we try to sort of we fill in these holes so that people can have the right reaction to the kind of disinformation that they face.
The truth is, we need to do more and we need to do things differently. That's hard to accept at times, but it's encouraging to know that there are firms like FactCheck whose work might wind up pushing the industry in the right direction. That was today's episode of Teka Teka. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. What do you think about this new way of fighting misinformation and disinformation? Sound off on the comments of this episode or let us know on social media. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. Thanks for listening.